like we have everybody from both sides, so we won't go through all the names, but everybody is here. And we do have appointing of a chairperson, so anyone have a motion to appoint a chairperson?
I'll make a motion to appoint Mark McNally.
Second.
All right, I'll hand it over to you, Mark.
All right. We have the minutes, and those have been distributed. You've all had a chance to look at these. Any discussion necessary? Okay. I'll entertain a motion for acceptance of the minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve. Second.
Okay. All those in favor of accepting the minutes as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. That's our minutes. All right. We all know why we're here, and we've got a couple of guests, and I just want to start off by reading something that was in this agreement that we're going to be talking about, the intergovernmental agreement between the Village of Cambridge and the Town of Oakland. It was signed off on 2006, and specifically paragraph 2.11, commitment. The village and the town have enjoyed a good relationship over the years and have not experienced the hostility present in many relationships between towns and villages. This goes on to say the village and the town believe that entering this agreement will preserve the existing good relationship and provide greater certainty with respect to joint planning in the future. I'd like us to keep this in mind as we kind of proceed with our discussion, our comments, questions, and kind of going from there. We do have the attorney, but I think we can probably open this up, first of all, with just general comments. And I'm going to turn to you, Bernie, Nicolay, if you can introduce yourself and just kind of explain where the school might be at on this project.
Sure. My name is Bernie Nicolay. I'm the superintendent of schools in Cambridge, and I've spent most of my life in Oakland and the last decade or so in Cambridge, so I'm very familiar with the issue and both boards and the good work you do. From the school's perspective, Blue Jay Way is certainly an important road for our high school. I think everybody would agree with me that the road is in need of some repair. At a minimum, at the surface level, it's been that style of road and that quality of road for 50 years. As long as the school has been there, it's been adequate. So our priority would be, at a minimum, a new surface on the road. We would like to add sidewalks. We have a lot of students that walk on Blue Jay Way, and whatever degree the road is repaired to, we would like to add sidewalks, so even if it was at the same level of street that it is now. So those are our priorities. I guess we would definitely like to not be involved in who owns the road and who's responsible for what as far as repair or resurfacing the road or the decision at what level that road is repaired to. Again, I think we would like it at the highest quality level with curb and gutter would be awesome, but that's really not our decision to make. But it would be nice, but we could, like I said, we've been fine with the road at the level it's been at for a long time. But it is in badly need of resurfacing at the very least. So I'll answer any questions you might have, Mark, but that's kind of the gist of where the school district is at.
Okay, and we will be talking more, but you had mentioned in your correspondence to Gene and I about the possibility of maybe applying for a grant with the Transportation Alternatives grant funding.
Yeah.
Are you going to be going ahead with this, and then we could do this in concert with you later on? How do you want to handle that?
Well, it used to be a Safe Routes to School grant opportunity, and that's morphed into a TAP grant.
I think you have in front of me what that stands for. But I think it's something whoever is going to be responsible for that road should look into. I don't know that it's a guarantee that you would get that grant, but I did talk to someone at DOT today who is very familiar with that grant, and I described our safety concern with the sidewalks and the state of the road, and he thought that it would be a good grant application. And the timing, he said, is good, as those are due, those open up in October. So if you could resolve this in that time frame, you could write that grant. That's a federal grant. It has 80% matching, 80% federal funds and then 20% local funds. So, and looking at the projects that have been approved in the past, even with that big number that you've talked about for making significant repairs, I think that is a big grant, and it could serve, it could possibly help a great deal for fixing that road. So and I did learn something new. I said that has to be applied for by a municipality, a village or a township, and first he said yes, but then he said if the school district just applied for the sidewalk portion of that, we could sponsor that portion of it, but the road part would have to come from Oakland or the village of Cambridge.
All right. Any questions of Bernie here from
So is it your understanding, Bernie, that TAG grant could apply to the road as well as the sidewalk?
Definitely.
And anything related to the road project, like storm sewer?
That I couldn't say.
Gutter?
I don't know the answer to that, but the numbers of grants in other communities were significant, so I would have to know. That grant is a transportation alternatives grant, and there's a safety aspect that's a big component of those grants. So,
If that's, Ted, if that's anything like the LRIP grants that are available for towns, sewer, that kind of thing is not included. Now, sewer extensions, new covers or whatever, that would be,
That
but
would be
digging
covered.
down, replacing the sewer,
Stormwater wouldn't be then?
no.
Something, okay.
it'd be certainly worth looking into.
Yeah,
You know, there's no harm in looking into it and finding out that it's really not going to help. But I've got a feeling that it would be something that could help.
This is something different than what you talked to me about back in January, February, correct?
No, that's the same grant. It's just the new cycle is coming up for application.
Because at that time, they told me that was eaten up for 2 years. That's why I kind of lost interest in it.
Right. Well, the new cycle starts in October, so there's new money that will be available.
Well, maybe with the new budget, there will be.
I hope so.
any other questions of Bernie? Well, thank you for this information, Bernie. I know you're going to be following this, but we appreciate you coming here tonight. Just kind of kicking things off.
Yeah.
All right.
Good luck.
Okay.
I might add, that is a 66-foot right-of-way. And if that applies to either road or sidewalk, I mean, that's a significant number. If, I don't know what sidewalk costs, but getting 80% of the road cost, that's significant.
How long does it take to get an affirmative on this? Any idea at all? Or nobody's done this, I suppose.
Well, when we applied for the LRIP grant for Ripley Road, that took about 8 months to get
Okay.
approved. We had to apply for an exception of standards, which added an additional 3 months. So it was about a year process.
So Bernie, can you live with that road for a year while this grant, notwithstanding, the outcome of tonight? But to go through that grant filing application process?
I think so.
The road's been in pretty tough shape for a few years. I think we can make it through another school year if you fill potholes.
Okay, all right. Well, I think the village would continue to do the repairs we've been doing, so we fill the potholes and.
Who would,
Jimmy?
who would apply for the grant?
I gotta,
Whoever
well,
owns the road.
Yep, whoever owns the road.
well, okay, maybe we could do a joint filing.
For a state grant, it would have to be who owns the road.
Mm.
We can't apply for a grant outside our
Jurisdiction.
jurisdiction.
All right,
It would have to be.
okay.
This is
Which,
federal.
yeah, we're right back to what we're gonna get into here. All righty, thank you very much, Bernie.
You're welcome.
And we will stay in touch with you. Any other comments here from the audience? I know you're all here on this issue, so, okay. Let's get started. When we last met, we had talked about trying to get a hold of the attorney who had actually drafted this the intergovernmental agreement. And this was done by Constance Anderson and drafted on behalf of Cambridge. Lisa, you were able to get a hold of Connie. Connie, can you talk to us, because you're the person who was responsible for this thing, and kind of your recollection, because this is going back now to 2006, so we'll put that out there right away. But please talk to us about this agreement and what you recall as far as the impetus and what you were trying to accomplish.
My recollection, and again, it is from 2006, when I look back at that time, Vern Davis was the town chair, and I still am sorry that he passed away in the accident that he had on the farm. But and I believe Jean was on the town board, and otherwise I don't think anyone who's on the village board is the same. So that leaves us with a pretty small history here.
Don is here.
Well, Don is here, yes, yeah. Not on the board. So we were working together on a number of things, not the least of which was the Cambridge Oakland Wastewater Commission and the sewage treatment plant that had to be put in. This area was a really difficult area for many reasons. It was a difficult area because there were pipes in roads that had been paid for by one community or another, but the road right-of-way itself wasn't necessarily in that same community. Different services were offered. So, and if you look at the fees and taxes that were paid at that time, that was also confusing to residents as well as to both of the local governments. So it was a difficult area to address. When it came to maintaining the streets in that area, I think the guys in Public Works pretty much decided how to do that, and this was not at all uncommon for a period of time, that based on a handshake on what made logical sense on how to plow roads and take care of things, issues were addressed. Both communities decided that it would be helpful for there to be joint planning in that area. There were a number of things on the horizon. This is 2006, 2 years before the 2008 recession. So there were a lot of possibilities, and the treatment plant was going to be put in, so there'd be expanded capacity. And it was in that context that it made sense for there to be joint planning for certain areas, and for each community to say, okay, we won't argue with you about development in this area, you won't argue with us about development in another area. And to have those lines be clear so that everyone could proceed rather than getting into annexation wars. And that was really the big purpose of doing this, was for joint planning. One of the joint issues was, let's put down in writing what our expectations are about who's going to maintain the roads. One of the discussions I recall at the time was, what does that mean? Is it going to be that the village is going to have responsibility, but at what standard? And so we talked about, well, at the same standard as other village roads. We'll maintain them at the same standard as other village roads. We're not going to treat these roads differently because there is a town resident on that side of the road. And the roads were split down the middle. I mean, you don't repair, plow, or reconstruct roads half and half. The other legal challenge was that some of these roads were done by easement, not by dedication. Today, we've got a lot of public dedication of roads. So if a developer is coming in and putting in a subdivision, on that plat, the developer dedicates the road to the public, and it's clear that if that subdivision map is within a particular municipality, it is dedicated to that municipality. Here, there were easements, and the ownership was the property owners subject to this public easement. So it was a complicated issue because there was no desire for there to be annexation. No one wanted to try to take town taxpayers and force them to become village residents. That was really part of the discussion I recall. I don't know if, when I'm saying we here, I'm saying it on behalf of the village. The village's side was saying, we're not trying to take your taxpayers. We're not trying to annex the town. We're trying to work out a reasonable way to plan in these areas. So if in these roads that we're already sort of taking care of, we have the responsibility to maintain those, we'll do it just like we do our other roads. And I think the annexation issue is in the first section of the agreement, where it's saying, to the extent that these roads were created by easement rather than dedication, the roads will remain in the town until such time as the adjacent property owner is annexed into the village. There was an assumption at that time, too, that there would be annexations, that this area would grow, and that some of those property owners would naturally be annexed in, and the town would be growing in its joint planning area, in its area, which you can see in the maps that were attached to this. There were areas that were expected for town development. As it turned out, 2008 happened. The prospects that folks were looking for did not come to fruition. The other thing that was an important part of this agreement was, if it doesn't work after 10 years, either of us can walk away. It doesn't have to be a mutual agreement, but 90 days before the end of the 10th year, either the town or the village can say, by resolution, we'd like to terminate the agreement, and the agreement will be terminated. 20 years was in the document because 20 years is a normal horizon for comprehensive planning. There wasn't any other magic to that. Neither community chose to terminate the agreement at the end of the first 10-year period. Probably that happened through inadvertence. It just wasn't on a calendar. The new boards didn't happen to look at it. That doesn't mean that the communities couldn't choose to terminate this agreement today if you mutually chose to do that. But it can't be done unilaterally anymore. So you'd have to agree to end this document. Otherwise, it expires in 2026. So as to what my recollection is on the term maintenance, I don't mean reconstruction when I use the term maintenance, sincerely. And I can't say that a different way because I don't view it that a different way. I see maintenance as keeping something at a certain level. It's being maintained at the level it is. It was not a road that was at village standards. It didn't have curb and gutter, storm sewer. It was a town road, and it would be maintained at those town road standards at the village's expense. There are some state road aids. We all know that it's really nice to get them, but that nobody makes a budget decision based on what you get in state aids for roads. But if they were being maintained, plowed, crack-filled, potholes taken care of, that sort of thing by one community, they should get the state aids. And that's how it was looked at. I don't know if there is some other information that the town has. If I was not present at town discussions on this particular agreement, I was present with the village and when there were joint meetings. I don't know who reviewed this on behalf of the town, but certainly there was ample time for there to have been a review. I didn't talk with another attorney while this was being done. So I don't know that answers or helps to solve this, but I don't think it's going to be a clear look at a definition, and that there is only one way to look at what the word maintenance means. And in my recollection, and in my common usage of the term, it doesn't include capital improvements. It's sort of, I see those more in tax terms on what you do as maintenance that you can't take as an expense in the same way that you can when you have a capital expense. So that's just the way that I look at those terms. Could the village choose to rebuild a road? Well, of course it could. No one would say don't build a road if that were happening. But right now, the road's legally still, half of it, I think, is legally still with the town and half with the village. And the village is choosing to maintain it and is now required to maintain it under this agreement. So, as we all know, hindsight is always 20/20. If we could have called that out, it would have avoided this kind of controversy that there is right now. It's a difficult situation because the road's never been in the greatest of shape. And I don't know what the consideration would be for the village taking on that kind of responsibility for really not much benefit. They didn't, if that had been the intent, I would have been asking the village why it was choosing to do that. So what I'm hoping is that the communities can look at this and look at some of the grant options and see if it's possible to resurface and invest those dollars in something that's going to help the community rather than paying on a contest. I did receive, the other things that I've looked at were the editorial that the town board put together, probably with Steve Zach's assistance, and Steve's email. I respect Steve. He's a great attorney. I know he wasn't there while this was happening. And I'm happy to talk with him about what options there might be if that's something that the Village of Cambridge wants me to do. And obviously you would need to approve him to be working on behalf of the town. But my hope is that the language in here that describes the way that the village and town historically had worked with one another will continue, and that the other section that was in here intentionally, let me see if I can pull this up. It had to do with good faith performance. And that we would act, both communities, in a manner that was in good faith and fair dealing. I'm not seeing this at 4.9. The agreement, this agreement requires the parties to act or to refrain from acting on a number of matters. The parties hereby acknowledge that this agreement imposes on them a duty of good faith and fair dealing. So every word and everything that might happen over 20 years was not listed in this document. There was a decision that there would be good faith and fair dealing between the two communities in performance of the agreement. And I think that's still possible. It's hard. I wish I'd been involved earlier to kind of provide at least the context. I haven't had an opportunity to talk with the village board. I talked with the village engineer on a different matter yesterday, and he said, I think Lisa would really appreciate it if you gave her a call. That was yesterday. So I dusted these things off to be able to come here to this meeting tonight, and I'm doing that really to see if there are other questions that I can help with, or if there's a way for the two communities to not let this be a wedge between them, as it seems like it's becoming.
Connie, do you recall if you ever made an effort to have these roads annexed? Because at the majority of our original meetings, that was always a topic.
Not the roads themselves. It was, no, I did not make any effort to have these roads annexed. And I don't believe that the village attorney did either. Remember, I was special counsel on this because Mary had a conflict.
Yeah.
It was that we would do whatever was permissible to make sure that we were addressing these as if Blue Jay Way was a village road, this segment. But I don't know how we could annex just part of the road without involving division of the town residents' property. The boundaries there are crazy. They're not reasonable for today's standard. We know how they got there. That's how it happens. Things happen piecemeal. If those properties ultimately are annexed to the village, there won't be any question that the full road is in the village. Right now, it is a question. You know,
When the,
I was gonna say, in the agreement, section 1, it does state that the roads will remain in the town until such time as the adjacent property owner is annexed into the village. So the catalyst to annexing the road would have been in the annexation of the actual properties.
but then on each segment, each road segment, it says that the village and the town, let's see what sound, I gotta read this again.
you're probably looking at the second section, Gene, where you're saying that we'll take any and all permissible actions
Correct,
to have the status be
right.
as a village road.
That's why I asked the question. So what happened to these people on that segment of Blue Jay Way that annexed into the village? What happened to that, they own to the center of the road? What? Because we got a 66-foot easement through there.
Right.
The right-of-way is 66 feet wide.
And see, we'd have to pull the actual maps, get the map that shows the home. And was this a CSM? Was it part of a subdivision? Do you recall?
don't.
That's the reason that we couldn't do this easily. Some of them were on the side of the road that was village, and some were on the side of the road that was town, but it wasn't a normal subdivision. So part of the road was just an easement on a map, and the other part of the road, probably just because the road's there and the property's in the village, becomes, the village has a right to use it, and it's in the village.
Well, the town has a right to use it too.
Right, yes.
They have a right to use 66 feet through there, because that's a right-of-way. So I mean, that argument doesn't,
Right to use is probably the wrong phrase. The road, what I'm trying to describe is if you've got a road, but, and let's just use left and right. So you're driving down, on the left, there's the school, and on the right, there's more residential properties. If the people on the left are all in the village, well, if there's a road along that property, within the map that created the school and the map that created those homes at one end and the other, my question would be to look at that real estate document and see where the right-of-way is.
Is it for the village or the town?
It's not that it's for the village or the town. How was the right-of-way actually created?
well, we got a guy here that annexed in on a town road. What, do you recall what happened with you owning to the center of the road, Don?
Yeah, when I annexed, and my attorney didn't quite do it to what I wanted, but I'm annexed to the center line of Potter's Road.
Potter's Road or?
Potter's. Blue Jay was supposed to also be annexed to the center line, because in our village ordinances, we recommend or require that a property be annexed to the center of the road to kind of stop problems like this from happening in the future. So it was approved to the center line of Potter's. As far as Blue Jay Way, it's just up to, your right of way.
That's not what our map shows. Our map shows you own to the center of Blue Jay Way.
See, this is, each one of these would be, we'd have to investigate, and that was not something that either side wanted to have to go through for each of the properties.
Correct me if I'm, but most of Blue Jay Way on our map shows that it's township owned. Correct?
Yeah.
And the road aids, therefore, we have 0.1 mile or something that we get road aids for on Blue Jay. But our map shows that the town owns the road. And that's what the,
Including the DOT.
So,
Well, what about the Cambridge residents that live on that road? So they've given
It's-
easements to the town?
it
Is that
shows
correct?
that the
You have to
township
go
owns
back
the
and
road.
look.
you know,
And that's where,
this is
kinda
why this
saying
mixed-use
it's
area is a nightmare.
yeah.
And, it's a fun legal issue to solve. We could spend the time and really try to find what the answer is to that, if that's what the communities want to support. But it will take surveying, mapping, and trying to get things consistent with DOT and with the village. There's a village official map and the town maps. I think you're gonna uncover things that, I think you may find that it's a Pandora's box.
Chris, when you checked with the Department of Administration about the village annexing those roads, was anything said about ownership, any of that?
As far as who owns it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, forgive me for looking at my phone, but I'm actually pulling up the map right now from the county. As it looks on the county maps, all of Blue Jay Way from, I wish I had a projector I could put this on.
Simonson.
Yeah, that's it, from Simonson all the way to Potter's is a town road, on both sides. Not one or the other, both sides. But then you get to North Street and it's, as you talked about, it's kind of half and back and forth in a little bit, and then, so, but the DOA, I mean, as far as I can remember, the ownership of the road would, I guess I'm not sure what your question is.
Well, did they say about the ownership to the center of the road? They didn't
Yeah.
address that?
Oh, no, we didn't even talk about that, didn't come up.
So, but if something were annexed, if one of those property owners annexed into the village, then there'd be a little kind of cutout almost that would be
And
village.
that's where our 0.1 mile or something along the road is.
You've got some little cutout, someone's in the village.
Gene, I don't know if you remember, but a lot of this in county, maybe you'll recall as well, all started with Simonson Street. Because there was a portion of Simonson Street that was all township, coming from 12 to North Street. And then it went to the village all the way down to 18. We were trying to clean up these properties, and we had little islands of township, little triangles in the middle of the lot. They were township and surrounded by village, so we were all on that. At that time, we realized we wanted to improve Simonson Street, but we would have to stop at North Street, which made absolutely no sense for the buses and things like that. We wanted to enlarge the road and bring it to village standards. So what the village, or the township did, was give us the road and just turned it over to the village. From there, then, the village owned the road. We went ahead and proceeded construction and improvements on that road.
And curb and gutter.
Yeah, the whole 9 yards, right. But in doing that, that's kind of a unique property because you're not blocking somebody from getting in to their home. They're faced on township roads along North Street and US Highway 12 along the southern half of it. So you weren't cutting things up.
Mm-hmm.
No, but two residents on the east side of Simonson there, that one block area, those two residents are still in the village. They're still in the
Still in
town.
the township, but they have access from north and they have access from the highway, Highway 12.
Mm-mm. They both access to, those two residents both access to Simonson.
Whether they have a legal right to access somewhere else, maybe.
Perhaps.
Maybe that's what, is that what you're saying, Don?
That's what I.
They have the alley back there off of Simonson.
What's that?
There's an alley that has access.
Yes,
Yeah.
there's an alleyway.
Okay.
You're right. You lived there, you should know.
In answer to one of your questions before, Gene, and you may recall this, Don, back after the agreement was drawn up, April Little and I had met with the state to see about options of annexing. And at that time, the rulings were you can't annex if you're creating islands. So we had looked into it, not to the point of having legal, but meeting with the state. And they at that time said, no, you can't. If you annex this, you're creating an island here. Because it was so jagged, at that point, they told us, no, you cannot do annexations of the roads because you'd be creating the islands.
See, today you can.
It has changed, but back then, they said, no, you can't. So we had looked at it.
I wonder if it was the DOT that
That-
told you that. They're not the ones that.
It was DOA.
It was the
It
Department
was
of
DOA
Administration.
that we had met with.
They'd be the final word on those
Yeah.
kinds of things.
And again, that was probably 10 or 12 years ago, 12 years ago that, but we had reached out and had those conversations back then.
Okay. We've heard from Connie. Is there anything else that you can remember, Don, that about this and this agreement that was drafted
The only thing that came to mind after our last meeting was, I don't know if it was ever followed through on or if it was even legal to do, but there was talk that we would attach, deed restrict those two properties that are in the town. And that when that property is sold by deed restriction, they had to annex to the village of Cambridge.
I don't remember
We
that.
thought that was a long-term way of kind of maybe pushing the problem down the road a ways.
I brought that up.
I have no recollection of that ever being discussed, Tom.
So, yeah, it came to me when I was mowing the lawn.
That-
And,
Because it's only two of the six
it's just
properties.
two of the properties that are
That's
the
right.
real.
Well, you got, you got two on Blue Jay Way, you got a lot of them on North.
Oh, you got a lot
We're
on
talking about
north,
Blue
yeah.
Jay Way
Just
right now.
I was just
understand,
looking at Blue Jay.
But what he's talking about, I don't recall that ever being discussed in this agreement.
No,
for
not
each-
on that side, just those two homes.
On Blue Jay Way.
And
It
what
was
would be the
discussed, but not a
motivation
deed
for those
restriction.
people
There-
to allow their property to be restricted?
Well, that would, I
That's a-
think that
that's-
hampered our discussions, but I know it was something we were working on.
Okay.
That's all I can recall.
I don't remember being part of that discussion, but that doesn't mean that the discussion
We
didn't
did a lot of
occur.
things without letting you know.
Yeah, I know that.
Dean, you were there at the time, right?
Mhm.
Okay, is there anything you want to add to tonight's discussion that Don and Connie have not brought up so far?
Well, the thing in the agreement for each street, it states that both the village and the town shall take any and all permissible actions to establish named street as a village road. We put that on each of the three roads when we wrote this agreement.
Mhm.
And then, like Lisa said, they checked and it couldn't be done. Because I know we talked about it at several of the first meetings we had, because we've had annual meetings. And we did have a meeting at 10 years, but or the village didn't come up with a quorum, so decisions couldn't be made. That was mutually. So,
Before we go any further, stop on that. Lisa, do you remember anything coming through on this? On this agreement being discussed, and we were going to move ahead with the second 10 years?
No, there was, like Jean said, we were trying to look back over the years of when we met. We haven't been real consistent at meeting every year. There was one year that a meeting was scheduled, but there was not a quorum.
and that was the
So-
10-year,
So the
10th year.
The joint group never did sit down and say, this is coming up, do we want, anyone want to make changes or get out of it? I also think though at that time, redoing of the road wasn't being discussed. I think if we were looking, saying Blue Jay Way has to be discussed, and
Okay.
there would have been big effort to
All right.
get the group together to talk
But
about
there,
the
but there
agreement at
was,
that time.
there was a discussion at that meeting about making changes, which we made at our last meeting, I believe, and that is the planning committee. We had it in the agreement that the planning committee met quarterly.
Yeah.
Didn't make sense. In all the years we've doing this, we had one issue where the joint planning committee had to get together.
Yeah.
So we said, at the discretion of the town chair or the village president. That was done at that meeting, but then we didn't have a quorum, so we couldn't make the decision until the following
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
And the planning committee, the joint planning committee met in November of 16 to review and agree that we still wanted to keep the planning part of this document as was. So we did, the planning committee, the joint planning committee did their review and recommended no changes at that time. So to say that it hasn't been paid attention to isn't quite accurate.
the meetings that we had to put this together, which was probably over about a 2-year period, wouldn't you say,
I
Don?
would say,
Most of that discussion was on joint planning.
Mhm.
There was, and boundaries, the
Right.
boundary area.
Right, that's,
There was very little discussed about the roads, other than they would be maintaining those 3 roads, and we would be giving them the road aid for doing that. But the majority of that was joint planning, those meetings.
I'd agree, that was the focus of the discussions.
And
And
that's
it
the
was,
important part of this agreement, is the joint planning process.
exactly.
And it is, you bet.
Okay. Anything else that you can remember that wasn't mentioned here by Connie and Don?
No?
Do you remember any discussions about repairs or rebuilding the roads?
No.
See, I don't think that was a part of the discussions we were having at that time.
Well, if you're gonna treat them like, as a village road,
Mhm.
that doesn't mean curb and gutter has to go on them. But if they need to be ground and repaved, I would think that would be your regular maintenance. That's done every 25 or 30 years. And that's how Steve Zach from Boardman Clark interpreted it as well.
Okay.
And so that's the point, that's the point of contention.
Yeah.
Is the billing.
Well, the point of contention is who owns the road.
No, that's not, I don't think anybody disagrees. The town of Oakland owns the road.
You're right, you're right.
So we don't agree that. I think what we aren't agreeing on is what the definition of the word maintenance is, period. And the attorney who drew up this agreement, from Connie's assessment of what maintenance means, it isn't the refurbishment of the road.
I differ slightly with that. That was her personal opinion. That was not the reflection of the agreement. We don't really know what the people sitting around the table agreed to, except they said to maintain it as all village roads.
Correct.
So whatever the village does to their roads, they need to do to this road.
But we do maintain it the same way we maintain the village roads.
If a village road is in really bad shape, will you repave it?
But that's not maintaining it. That is a
That's a
capital
expense.
that is a capital expense, and that's something entirely different.
That's
So
your
maintain and
interpretation.
serve.
Okay, one at a time.
That's what it says, maintain and serve all portions of
Right,
the
but-
road as if it was a village road. Serve that portion of the road if it needs to be
Serve means
repaired.
plowing. Serve means filling a pothole.
patchwork.
Maintain and serve doesn't mean resurfacing and reconstructing a road. It doesn't mean
Seems to me
reconstruction.
the definitions should have been in here then, because we have a definite disagreement on what those words mean.
In hindsight today, it's clear that there's a different view on the village and the town side of what those roads, on what these words meant. I didn't have a sense that there was that difference at the time. That's all I can offer to it, because we didn't discuss, other than instead of having the guys in Public Works decide how they were going to address these, we'd say, yes, we're taking responsibility for these particular segments. And having this in writing was to avoid these handshakes if people left the Department of Public Works on both sides, to just try to, the handshake understandings weren't going to carry the day. But the reason that it wouldn't have crossed my mind, and clearly in hindsight, I wish that it had, then that we had ironed it out right at that moment, is that those guys didn't have the authority to have a road reconstructed. That wasn't even in their purview. It was just that it was logical to go around the block, to not, you would take care of that part. They were taking care of that part at the village already. So if we'd started talking about reconstruction at that time, we would have gotten into a lot more detail. if it's reconstructed, will it be reconstructed to village standards, even if it's legally located in the town? And how does that happen? Because it still is a legal town road. But, so these are the kinds of issues that would come up that we did not, this agreement was not intended to address. It really wasn't intended to address this. It was intended to make sure that the very positive relationship that existed between the town and the village could be maintained, and that there could be joint planning on issues of future development. And this was simply a look back. These are areas that the village is already handling. Can we put it in the document? And so I wish I had been here when this first came up to say that and to talk with Steve about the context. I don't want to get into sort of legal issues on this because Steve's not here, and it's just not right to get to legal conclusions. It's just sort of facts of what happened at that time. And if we want to get into some of those other issues and what they might mean legally, it's fair for there to be, for Steve and I to talk, or Steve and whoever the village chooses to represent it to talk. So that's not the goal of tonight. It's just to get a flavor of what we were doing then, and we were doing joint planning. And we were doing joint planning, we were doing joint sewer, we were thinking about fees and really crazy ways that people were charged and not charged in this area because it was a hodgepodge. And so we wanted to fix that line a little better so we could try to work on how the future of both communities were going to develop. That there'd be areas that the village would not contest and areas that the town would not. And that there would be no annexations outside of those lines unless the town agreed to it. So it was really to deal with more of an annexation and planning threat than it was intended to make this as big an issue as it's become.
Okay, so here's where we're at. I don't think there's any question as far as ownership of the road. That road belongs to the town of Oakland. And if we need any outside verification, that's where the road aid is sent. You remit it to us, and we get $1,800 a year for Potters and Blue Jay.
For all three.
Okay, right, Lisa, 1,800. The village has been responsible with its maintenance obligations, including filling potholes and snow plowing, correct? We don't have anybody talking about that. We know that we have a possibility here of getting a grant, but it may take a year. The question is, who's going to submit the grant? Because it has to be done appropriately, not just, willy-nilly. Gene, we have the sewer and the water lines, and these can go for what, another 15 years? 20 years?
25 to 40.
Yeah, I don't think you have an issue with water and sewer lines there. I mean, the sewer lines on Ripley Road were like new when we did that. It was put in the same time.
All right, so, Kathy?
There was no issue on who would apply for the grant because they own the road.
Well, the agreement, though, does say that the village shall be entitled to any and all state aid. I
But
guess
not grants.
It doesn't talk about a grant, that's the aid
I
that we
think
give
it's
you
it's
anyway.
gonna be really necessary to find.
I get it.
Well, the agreement states that both the village and the town further acknowledge that it's in the public interest for this segment of Blue Jay Way to be considered a village road as the date of this agreement. And then it goes on to state that they will make their best efforts to make that happen. So in that light, we're petitioning the state to have the village annex those roads.
Just Blue Jay Way, but not right now, correct?
All three.
All three. That's the
Well,
intent
if we
of the
go
agreement.
back though to the minutes that have been approved for this evening, off of the last meeting, which was held on April 24th. I'll just read this. The town believes while this is a town road, the signed agreement means the village will repair and replace. I'm not getting into the repair and replace, I'm just saying the village believes that this is a town road, correct? That's what was in the minutes that's been approved.
The town believes it.
Right. The town believes that, that's what was in the minutes.
I'm sorry, Mark, I'm not
Restate
getting
that,
your
please.
point.
The town believes that while this is a town road, the signed agreement means the village will repair and replace the roads and expects it to abide by the agreement. There's two parts there. If we're gonna get back into applying for this grant, who's gonna apply for it?
It has to be applied by the entity that legally owns the road. It is legally owned by.
And that's what the minutes
town of
state.
Oakland. Right,
Who,
right. So, while I think it would be great if we could jointly apply for it, I mean, we could jointly apply for it, but I don't think we would have it a standing as the Village of Cambridge because we don't own the road. And we can't ask for a grant on something that we don't own.
That's true.
Would, Mr.
It's a-
Katz, go ahead.
It says in the agreement that the village and town agree that Blue Jay Way from Simonson to Potter shall be treated as a village road, and that both the town and the village shall take any and all permissible actions to establish that said segment of Blue Jay Way status as a village road. So we're petitioning the state to have that annexed into the village. And here's the paperwork.
Okay.
It also says in here, we can refuse any annexation request. On 13.1, the village may
That's under joint planning,
unilaterally
yes.
deny any and all annexation requests.
That's under joint planning, that's not under the road maintenance. Under the road maintenance section, it says that both of us shall do everything we can to make it become a village road. We just offered to give you, and we filed an annexation, turning over all 3 streets to the village, so there's not any of these issues.
And that's great, that's great when the road needs to be repaired.
That's really not in the
That's
spirit
really-
of this agreement.
That's really
That's dirty
fair,
pool.
and, yeah, this
Well, you-
bottom part of this
The
agreement.
village has already looked into annexing the roads. Lisa's told us that. And I think it's been done more than once. So this isn't anything brand new.
Did that.
She looked at, when the village looked at annexing the road, it wasn't, the DOA said that we couldn't do it.
Yeah.
We have not looked into it since that time.
Today we can.
Just to bring up again, and it was brought up in section 1, you're quoting the statement that we'll do everything we can to annex. The agreement also says the roads will not be annexed unless the properties are annexed.
Right.
Is that part,
is that part
Not
of
Is
this?
that part of that?
That's gonna be, have to be
Yeah,
part of
right.
that.
For all
to
3
pick and
roads?
choose
Yes, as
which
well.
part of the language is,
This is the requirement for good faith. A document doesn't make people treat each other well or to deal with each other fairly. The people decide whether to do that. So there will be statements that can be made on both sides, and we can just line them up and say, you'll do what pursue that annexation, and all that will happen is the village will raise these issues to say that they're not accepting the annexation. And then we'll have an issue. So it's really the elected officials here who get to decide how to approach this. It's not an agreement.
I'm still here. Notwithstanding this, at this moment, we haven't accepted anything. I don't know what's in there, Gene. And I certainly wouldn't be able to give you any comment at all about it tonight.
Well, I didn't expect that.
Okay.
I just, it's in, the town is the one that has to initiate the annexation. That goes to the state along with a check, of course, for each one. And then the state has, what is it, 20 days? I suppose working days, so a month, to
But-
approve it.
Doesn't
But
it go
in
to the
this-
joint?
But in this agreement, it said, it does say, the roads will remain the town's until the adjacent property owner is annexed into the village.
But then in each one of it
So-
says they'll do everything they can to
But
Put
we
those
can't
roads
do
The
in.
annexation
anything.
wasn't possible at the time, so as the agreement was written, it wasn't possible for there to be annexation.
So you're kind of putting us in a situation where we have to force annexation on those homeowners on those 3 streets by this.
No.
They can
You
stay.
can create islands.
The DOA says it allows it with islands, and in particular, seeing how we're responding to an existing intergovernmental agreement, they're not gonna, from what we understand, they would not object to this.
But our existing governmental agreement says that the roads will remain the town until adjacent property owners are annexed into the village. I will go back to that statement, that is also in this
Right,
agreement.
there's a contradictory statement, I believe the attorney just made that case.
Well, all I can say is if you decide now that you're going to give us these roads in such disrepair, that really does knock out pretty much all the fair agreements, and it really gives a lot of a bad taste in everybody's mouth. And
I think, Kathy, when we did this agreement in '06, everybody on the town board assumed they were the village roads. We were turning those roads over to the village. I went with that understanding since 2006, when we did this original agreement. Because we sent the road aids to you folks. We don't maintain them, we don't do anything
But
with
the
them.
road aids came to you, so according to the state, you own the roads.
Well, yes, because they couldn't be annexed into the village at that time. So we agreed to send the road aids to the village.
If I can, Gene, one of the things that the village was looking at is those roads, especially around the school, are real high maintenance. They got bus traffic constantly. And they needed proper maintenance as well as replacement at some points. The village wanted those roads annexed to the village, but to do that, nothing's changed. The other properties have to be annexed. The township can force annexation. And we ask that of those 2 houses that stand by the high school, with the township would force those 2 to annex. So we could at least fix Blue Jay Way. The other ones, we don't know what the heck to do with. But at least we could do that one. And the township refused to force the annexation. Kind of tied the village's hand. The other reason, again, that the village wanted these roads is to get them in proper maintenance. We get a higher road aid than you do. Currently, the village is getting township road aid to maintain a village street, is what you're saying.
So we don't own it. But we do not own it.
Yeah, we don't own it. And we're taking less per month in road aid to maintain it. That was not the intention back then.
So my question would be, if Cambridge does, based on what you've filed with the state, if Cambridge does take ownership of those roads, and we repair them to our standards, including curb and gutter and sidewalk, how can our ordinances require us to special assess the homeowners on those roads. We can't special assess townships, the people who are in the township. So how does that work?
So why would you want to, that road has been perfectly fine for 50 years, as Bernie stated. Why would you think you'd have to put curb and gutter on that road?
Bernie also stated he would like to have curb and gutter and sidewalks.
Everybody would like certain
if
things,
it's-
but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what they get.
If it's a village road, then
That's
that's the standard that we have for our village road.
Well, how come Billstead Lane doesn't have curb and gutter?
We haven't redone that road for,
3 or 4 years, maybe, 5 years? That was
one-
just done.
It's not got a legal easement with, it's not a 66-foot road. There's no way you could, to update it to, well, I don't know where anybody's getting this village standard.
I don't either, because that applies to new developments. That doesn't apply to existing roads.
The village can do whatever they want in constructing or reconstructing a road.
That's right.
They have to have all the houses. In a development, it does.
well, if we choose it's in the best interest of the village to put in curb and gutter and sidewalk, our ordinances say we have to assess the property owners that abut those.
You don't have to.
That's what our ordinance states.
Mhm.
That's what our ordinance states. We've been through this many times since I've been on.
I've been
All right.
on it for-
Getting back though, I'm going to try to get something here accomplished with respect to burning, because we've got a year to work some of this out, but we have to have the right party who's going to file for the TEP, or TAP, whatever grant that you're talking
The
about.
right party of record. has-
Right.
Yeah.
Tag.
Okay.
For making the.
I have TAP, but it's, okay.
Tag.
Tag.
Transportation alternative grant.
So,
And the
Is
date for
the-
filing?
Gene, do you think that you and the town of Oakland would be willing to send in the application to DOT for this TAG grant to assist burning?
By October, you'll have acted on the annexation, so I think that works pretty well. I think your timeline is just about right.
Well, doesn't stop you from doing it right now.
The applications don't go in until October. They don't take applications 12 months a year.
Can I clear something up here? The transportation alternative grant is not for streets. It's for, pedestrian,
Yeah, that's,
bicycles. So it might apply towards sidewalk, it might apply towards crossings, it might apply towards bike lanes on streets, or bike paths. But it wouldn't apply to any street.
that's why I asked Bernie if that was the same thing he asked me about last January. And that's what I had found out. It's strictly for sidewalks and bike trails, that type of thing. But they also told me at that time, funds were eaten up until 2021, I think it was.
Well, okay, so it has to be filed in October. I don't know if we're gonna get a resolution, but at least if we could get some time, would you be willing to submit the application? Because at this point, you're still the legal owner.
We might not be in October with this.
I don't know if
So,
we'll.
you know what, Mark? If they're still the legal owner, then they'll have to pay for the reconstruction of the road. If in October we end up owning the road, then let's just, because you've already filed that with the state, right?
Yes, we did.
So that's a done deal. So we're gonna have to address that. So to me, the rest of the stuff in this meeting is kind of a moot point, because that kind of superseded everything.
And who's to say we, as a village, we just regrind the asphalt and
That would be in a
redo it?
different meeting.
I took
I
the
don't know.
liberty because right after the meeting
Mhm.
the joint meeting we had, we were putting out road bids. And I asked Jeff, our road supervisor, to include that portion of Blue Jay Way to get an idea what the cost is.
Sure.
I gave Mark the bids we got. I told both Wolf and Kane and Dolan that I would be doing that. They both agreed that that's viable. So the bid is there. It was $60,000 or 61, but I don't recall the exact number, but it was right around $60,000 with which is what Jeff had told us it would cost.
So what happens if we don't accept this? Whatever is in here.
Well, it says the village and the town will make their best effort to make sure that's done.
You know, at the risk of sounding sarcastic, I think the town has done taken a first kick at it. What happens if we don't accept it?
That's something we could talk about amongst ourselves. with
Well, I
our
think you're
council.
right, but you do want to look at the agreement states that the village and the town will make.
We'll talk to our,
their
we'll
best
talk to our
effort.
attorney about
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
Mark. I think that's the best
Yes.
thing for us to do. I think
Mhm.
we're not getting anywhere.
No.
So,
Haven't we tried to annex these before? Or is this the first time?
First time.
Huh?
First time. Never tried it before. Well, no, I'm taking it back. We did try Blue Jay Way before, because we wanted those two houses, clean up at least that edge. We tried a deal, it came back with, we're creating an island.
Two islands there.
Yeah. And, so they denied it. North Street, that's impossible to do, because there it's owned to the middle of the road for the church and a couple houses, and the rest of it's all.
But that could change over time too.
Oh, it
Take
could.
66 feet.
Yes. Yeah. So,
There is one issue that I'd like to discuss on North Street, and that is a drainage issue we have there on the south side of North Street. I think at one time, if you look close, you can see an indentation between two houses where there was a.
there was a box culvert, and
Yeah.
I actually walked by there the other night, and I found the corner
Oh, did you?
of the box culvert, and I
That's
can
caved in and
remember
plugged
as
up.
a kid playing in it, it was big enough to crawl. We thought this was really cool.
Pretty-
Remember that?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And the water would run down from where it's ponding right now, between the two houses,
Yeah.
which is very narrow.
Yeah, you can see the indentation.
Yeah, you can see the invitation, everything is there yet, but some people kind of filled in on their lawn a little bit. The box culvert's totally gone, from view off from North Street. But that would fix that up, and that's gonna impact what you do on Blue Jay Way.
We should have the right to upgrade that if we wanted to, correct?
Well,
Well, I look at it as it's a town problem. It's the town residents that are getting flooded. And I would propose that we probably wouldn't get it done this fall, but we look at piping from the south side of North Street, not the north side of South Street.
right, I'm with you.
Down to the pipe that goes across Blue Jay Way. And at that point, Blue Jay Way, whether we dead end the pipe, whether we put a manhole in or whatever we do, I'd let that up to the engineers. And then on the south side of North Street, we'll either need to put drains and a pipe or a shallow ditch to drain that area, because
That's gotta
that
get
water is going nowhere.
Yeah.
Soaks under the road, it raises heck with the road. We need to get rid of that.
You know, I don't know that this is really in,
Yeah.
within
It's not
the
in this-
agenda.
it's part of,
It's
yeah.
not part of the
It was
agenda.
something we were talking about last meeting. and-
But we would need the village's cooperation, because we'd have to go through a village property on Blue Jay Way.
Yes.
He's the guy that's been raising heck over the years anyway
Yeah.
with flooding. And I think he'd agree to do that, but we'd probably have to have some joint effort there.
Right.
All right, but getting back to where we're supposed to be talking about here with Blue Jay Way, there's two property owners, we're not gonna have any annexation. You guys aren't,
It says in the agreement that neither party will force annexation.
I think what we have to do with item number 5 is see the results of what the town of Oakland has chosen to file with the state. And I don't think there's any more discussion needed on item 5. And I think we should move on to item 6.
I agree.
Chris, you, any questions on where you're at right now before we move on? I'm gonna ask Ted, and I'll ask Susan as well.
No, I think we're, I guess, you know, if the state gets it and they look at it and they decide the contrary, that it's going to stay with Oakland, where does that put Oakland?
And that is something I think we need to talk about as a board.
Okay.
I think you need a closed session.
Yes, I
The
think so.
village
I think
needs
we do.
closed session to discuss.
Eric, do you have any questions here as you listen to this? No. All right. Susan? Ted? All right. I think we're gonna just, is the term table it or postpone it? You know that.
No action taken.
No action taken.
All right,
Yep.
okay. And now we're moving on to item number 6, discussion and possible action regarding the intergovernmental agreement for road maintenance.
I'm suggesting that we no action on that either till we talk about it.
All
I
right,
agree.
comments? Cambridge?
Mhm.
All right, so we're not gonna do anything with that one.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Well,
I'll second.
okay, I can just, how long is it gonna take for us to be able to sit down with legal and go through this, Lisa? Just a rough approximation.
I don't know, that's the first we're hearing about
Mhm.
them filing with the state, and so it's
I think we
news to
just,
us.
I think we
That's
just
all.
refer to staff,
Yeah.
and then staff will let us know more
Yeah.
what our next steps need to be, right, Lisa?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, and then you can stay in touch with Chris, because I just don't know if we'll get at this and get this a final before October. And if that's when these
So
are,
you've got a motion and a second.
We have a motion and a second?
Yep.
I understand. Okay.
Mark, I would just like to say, when it is decided who's going to improve the road, I offer the school district's services to help explore that grant and help write that grant, because there's a large benefit to the school district too, as far as the safety of adding sidewalks. And at a minimum, that project could be enhanced with TAP grant for sidewalks. So when that's resolved, we'd be happy to co-write that with
All right.
either municipality.
Okay, thank you, Bernie. We have a motion and a second for adjournment. I'm going to ask for discussion. Let's, all in favor of adjourning this meeting here, Town of Oakland and Village of Cambridge, please signify by saying aye.